Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm exploring health and looking at how behavioural science can help promote better health outcomes. Obviously, that means tackling coronavirus in some form, but the discussion I have with my guest this time is also much broader. Aline Holzwarth is an applied behavioural scientist. She heads up behavioural science at Pattern Health, a digital health platform. She's co-founded the Behaviour Shop, a behavioural science advisory company, and she holds an appointment as a principal at the Centre for Advanced Hindsight at Duke University. Now that name may ring a bell for those of you that have heard of someone called Dan Ariely. Dan is one of the most famous behavioural scientists in the world, and Aline has worked closely with him for a number of years. So she's not only got plenty of insights of her own, but she's got lots to share from her experience at Duke University as well. We have an absolutely fascinating conversation. It was full of laughter, it was such a lot of fun to record, and I'm hoping it'll be a huge amount of fun to listen to. So please sit back and enjoy my conversation with Aline Holzwarth. Aline, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here because I think your area of specialism is something that is highly relevant at the present time. But before we get into that, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about how you got into behavioral science and what interests you in that sphere?
Yeah, sure. I think so. Probably for many behavioral scientists, we're very focused on human behavior and what is more interesting in the world to study than human beings, right? You know, we're human beings. We're part of being a human being is thinking a lot about ourselves, and certainly I've done a lot of thinking about other humans and how they relate to myself. And so I studied psychology early on as an undergraduate, and I didn't always know that I wanted to get into psychology, but as soon as I understood the methods for understanding human behavior, that was what really sort of sold me. And I think a lot of disciplines in the behavioral sciences that are not, anthropology, for example, or political science, have not always traditionally studied behavior or humans in such a rigorous way in terms of using experiments. And so really seeing how psychology, at least before behavioral science was more of a field in itself as an undergrad as psychology, just seeing how, this sort of golden standard of the randomized controlled trial and experiments were being used, that really lured me in a way that I didn't ever expect. I was really more of I thought I was an English major. I really enjoy writing and, this more creative side of things. And I've sort of brought that in again later on to complement the quantitative side of things. But the sort of sexiness of the scientific method was really the thing that got me very excited about behavioral science and psychology originally. And I sort of realized there was nothing else that I could do with my life than study human behavior in these ways. And that's sort of, many steps along the way, decided to study business and get an MBA and so on, got lots of experience doing behavioral science, but that's sort of the very short version of why I love behavioral science.
And I think it's really interesting because one of the questions I get asked by people is sort of, well, why is this thing suddenly taken off? And I think the answer to that is for the first time we've got data on a massive scale, and a whole host of things came together, whether it's people challenging traditional economics. For the first time, there's this discipline you can actually study it with proper amounts of data, and we can use things like, search engines where people tell the truth more than they're likely to do to a human as a very powerful. I think that insight of sort of this is real, right? This isn't, I imagine if you go back 100 years, you're kind of, it's a little bit sort of, we'll experiment on the way that we can by observation. Mm-hmm. And now suddenly we've kind of opened, it's almost like in the same way that we can look inside the brain using MRI scans, we can kind of start to understand some of the things that are going on because we've got that power. And I totally understand that compulsion because suddenly this stuff is real.
Yeah. And the technologies as well that are facilitating this data collection and this data generation. If you sort of thought about how did behavioral scientists study dating, 20 years ago? Well, it's very different now that we have Tinder and OkCupid and all of these platforms, online dating websites and so on for people to connect. And now, whatever version of that has evolved in terms of coronavirus times, probably more data now that people are doing everything online. Or you look at digital health and the proliferation of wearables and digital health apps, these sorts of platforms that are constantly collecting data, or in the financial industry, now that we have mobile wallets, it's just such a different landscape than even 5 years ago, to be totally honest.
Right.
Just the amount of data and what we can do with it is evolving at lightning speed.
And it's fascinating, right? Because we're exposing ourselves now. As you say, the digital footprint doesn't lie.
Right.
And I always think back to my Spotify is the one that gets me, right? You can pretend that you're into really cool music, but Spotify will know the truth.
Hey, right? There's always private listening mode.
This is true. But if you have to use it, you kind of know you're doing something, that you don't want to share. So there's a naughtiness factor to it.
Yeah. Anytime Britney comes up.
Right. But you've got, you mentioned healthcare, which is your kind of area of expertise. And I'm fascinated by, how some of these dynamics are playing out now, because it's the one area you talked about, wearables. We know you're walking into a medical facility nowadays is a fundamentally different experience to the one it was 5-10 years ago, as you say, let alone 50 or 100. What are your sort of thoughts around behavioral science and health, and how is that playing itself out?
Yeah. Many thoughts there. I think that there was always a huge opportunity for digital health. And that opportunity has turned into really a necessity in the past couple of months, where before it was, hey, our processes and, everything could really be improved by having a digital element. Now it's sort of turned into, okay, this is really more of a digital first mentality. Like, we don't want you coming into the clinic. We're going to set the default to telehealth or, some sort of digital care program where you don't have to come into the office at all. We'll refill your medications and send them to you. You don't even have to pick them up at the pharmacy. And we'll just do all of this remotely because we have to. And we always could, but we didn't really, life is complex. We never get around to doing the things that we want to do. And even though, before maybe health systems realized, hey, this would be a very efficient, effective thing to do, they're busy with other things. And add that to something you're very familiar with, risk aversion, and, how health systems might not want to make that jump. Now it's sort of changed. I think it does sort of remain to be seen how lasting this will be. I'm beginning to be somewhat less optimistic than I was even a couple weeks ago. So when, depending on when you talk to me, my opinions are very different. I think a couple weeks ago, I was like, it's here to stay and everything is like very permanent, and not entirely, but I think in general, I'm losing a little bit of the optimism as I see health systems saying, okay, telehealth until whatever it is, May. There's a cutoff date, right? Which is when, and now we're gonna stop reimbursing. We're gonna start seeing patients in real life, and seeing those deadlines not being extended yet. And talking to my mom, honestly, who's a physician and has patients who they need to wait a couple weeks before they can be seen, but they should be seen remotely. There's no reason for them to be put into a dangerous situation. But the clinic that she's working at won't be reimbursed for that visit if it's remote. So as soon as June hits, or whatever the date is, that person is going to have to be coming into the clinic. And so I just think about that, and it's sort of bewildering to think that systems could, that the people operating these systems and those who are sort of designing the systems and the rules around them have not thought more than a couple weeks out.
I was smiling as you were talking, actually, because this kind of changing of one's mind on things is perfectly permitted under Corona time, because we have no clue what day of the week it is. Or when I got confused between weeks and months the other day, and I was convinced I'd done something like a week ago, and it was like 2 months ago. And I think so. This total kind of mental confusion is entirely permissible. And I think it's the one time you're allowed to kind of just flip flop and change your mind on stuff, because hey, although the world hasn't changed, we've had far too much time to think about it. So it's a kind of interesting thing. But I mean, this sort of digital health piece is interesting, because in a way, it's one of those things that conceptually, if I want medical advice, that's always been something where I've had to go somewhere. And part of that, I think, has been a taboo subject, a privacy thing. I need to be physically handled in order to them to be able to assess whatever it is. And I want that human interaction. I look at it and say that it's a good example of a technology that in theory can deliver stuff. But do we as humans want that? And I'm finding it fascinating to watch where we're forced to use it. We have no choice, or we recognize the dangers of face-to-face contact at the moment. But it's really interesting, because I think it challenges us. It's not just a logistical question. There is a sort of emotional piece associated with it as well. Is what we're being asked to do, is that unnatural?
So I think, there's also an interesting distinction between what are we replacing and what are we adding. So if you look at the level of care that we can get through one visit with our primary care physician a year, and that 15 minutes and what we get out of that, it's just not very much. So the opportunity for digital health to be a supplement to care, where you can go to your provider and and find, you would be a lot healthier if you started taking X medication, and you have hypertension, you should take some hypertension medications, whatever the thing is. You should probably get some exercise and start eating healthy. Well, these are things that the doctor's not going to follow you out of the office and help you do. But something like a digital care program, right? Like the healthcare ends after that 15 minutes. No one cares about you once you leave the office. You might get some, blood tests and some results sent to you. But there's no one really sort of looking after you. If we can automate these types of things by well-designed programs that are tailored and, sort of change over time based on your needs, that seems like just a very good a supplement that you can add to care. When you talk about the personal interactions between providers and patients, I think this is something that I personally can't really relate to. I have had many interactions with healthcare providers, and I wouldn't say that I feel a very close bond to any of them. And so I think I would be just happy seeing them without going through the hassle of driving to the office, having to find parking, having to pay for parking drives me nuts. Like, what, I'm paying $15 to walk into this clinic for 15 minutes and then leave. So all of the frictions that are in the way of actually going to the doctor's office might not stop me, because, I have a lot of flexibility in my job, and I can, take the morning off to spend 2 hours going to my 15-minute appointment. But that's not true for everyone. And I don't think that the benefit of that in-person interaction is enough to outweigh all of the costs involved in making that in-person trip.
There's actually disbenefit. So I was thinking back to the old trick of, people go with a minor ailment that's not the real reason they're there. And they kind of have some dumb, their foot looked at. And then as they're walking out, there's this kind of like, just one more thing. And that's the real reason they were there.
Yes.
And so I think there's something really interesting about it. On the one hand, it's a really intimate experience where, we want to be seen and we want to be. On the other hand, we behave slightly weirdly in the presence of doctors.
Oh, yeah.
So we've all done this, I'm sure, haven't we? How much do you drink? Do you smoke? How much exercise do you take? Are you eating? All those sorts of questions.
Perfect.
Which feels like an examination, right? And you kind of, what the exam answer should be. Right. And then you kind of try and, so you don't want to lie, but you steer it into, it's a generous interpretation, should we say, of the fact.
Yeah, you care what other people think about you, even when that person is your doctor.
Right. So it's an embarrassment factor. And of course, the digital interaction you can have, particularly if it's not the same person you're speaking to. Maybe you're speaking to AI, or maybe you're speaking to whoever's on the shift at that time. You can have those conversations without any of the need of those sort of human embarrassment pieces. So I'm assuming that from a psychological perspective, in terms of people's willingness to discuss awkward issues, presumably there's the potential for this to be much more, not only in terms of the sort of ongoing care, as you said, and the monitoring, but also just in terms of our psychological engagement with the profession. It seems to me we're more likely to be willing to engage on things because I can just go and consult about this funny rash I've got. I'm not revealing any of my medical details, I hasten to add, but you know, those sort of small, those minor ailments that you might not go and see the doctor for normally, you can suddenly do.
Yeah, and there is evidence showing that people are more forthcoming when they're talking to a computer, even a person on a computer, than a person in real life. So there's definitely evidence to support that.
Clearly, before we were recording, we were having the "do we talk about it or not" discussion, and clearly we will. So I might as well bring up the C word.
Here we are.
Now,
we've already gone there.
And I mean, it's like this is clearly a fascinating time because, you know, as has been said a multitude of times, you know, this is the biggest behavioral experiment ever conducted, which is getting people to change what they do. And there's a massive medical element. So I figure who better to kind of address the issue with than you? And so what is your sort of perspective on behaviors and medical conditions and what's going on at the moment?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there is so much going on and you know, going back to changing our minds over time, I just think about the evolution of where my mind has been in, you know, March versus the second week of March versus the third and the fourth, and, you know, getting into it. And then where did April go? And like suddenly May is almost gone. And just thinking about the state of the world in all of these phases is so fascinating. And there are so many elements to coronavirus time behavior change that have completely shocked me as an expert in behavioral science. Right. You know, as someone who understands human behavior or attempts to understand human behavior, maybe like 100% of my time, I'm still, you know, going through surprise after surprise. And I think when I think about sort of where the focuses have been over time, first there was a lot of, you know, and with behavioral science, we do a lot of, okay, what's the behavior? You know, so like started on that, I think. So I'm thinking about over time, what are the behaviors that have been important over time and sort of the focus of coronavirus. And so first we kind of started with, all right, everyone wash your hands, don't touch your face. And so thinking through a lot of different ways to get people to, you know, to do those things. And then we moved to, okay, that doesn't really work. Like, let's just get everyone to stay home and, you know, no physical interaction at all. And then looking at how social norms have spread throughout really the world and this sort of contagion of behaviors and then mask wearing, how that's become a thing. I think if you would have asked most people, would anyone in the US wear a mask ever, they would have said, no, that's not really something that we do. You don't see that, but now you do. Like this contagion of behavior. Every time I go outside, I'm wearing a mask. I'm shocked by myself and my own behavior, my neighbor's behavior. It's just amazing. And then you're thinking about as people have been in quarantine for these prolonged periods of time, how are they sort of dealing with that, right? How are they keeping up their well-being? How are their relationships being maintained, sometimes strengthened? One thing we've seen at Pattern Health is our relationships with partners has actually become much stronger and closer, sort of unexpectedly.
Which is interesting, right? Because you would think the opposite.
Absolutely.
Lock people in a small space together and you know, cracks start to appear in things, but you're seeing the opposite. That's really interesting.
It's counterintuitive. It's one of the sort of many findings in behavioral science where you see if you put people in a situation of acute stress or pain, so you have someone undergo some sort of painful experience, and some of the studies, they have people put their hands in ice cold water or eat a chili pepper or do wall squats. There's these ridiculous things, or but painful, right? So acutely pain, not prolonged.
All of them, they're always sadistic, these things.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always sort of looked at these things and gone, there must be a slightly sadistic mind because you're allowed to experiment and you've got their consent, so it's all legitimate. But you're right, it's always putting people in unpleasant situations. Let's see what happens if we do this.
Exactly. Yeah. How how much can we shock people before?
Right.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's also an interesting thing to think about. How much do these lab studies translate into real world behaviors? Some you can make a better argument than others, but in general, I think this finding that that acute pain and stress leads people to be more pro-social. They're more giving this sort of tend and befriend hypothesis, which competes with the sort of tiger is chasing me reaction, that this actually wins in these situations. You would see the opposite effect with prolonged exposure. So that's sort of something that I worry about as quarantine is becoming longer and longer. Oh, is this going to look like more like chronic stress or chronic pain? Well, you don't really see high levels of prosocial behavior coming out of that. And so I guess again, as things evolve, I worry a little bit more about that now. And so that's sort of why we've started focusing on helping people use strategies and engage in behaviors that help their well-being while they're isolating or quarantining. And these are, some of Laurie Santos's science of well-being strategies have been shown to be very effective. And so now I'm thinking a lot about what can we do to actually help while we're in quarantine, and how can these sorts of strategies be applied to digital health programs, even when, maybe patients are not being treated for depression, or there's no sort of clinical element of anxiety or anything mental health related in terms of a diagnosis. But still, we sort of have to realize we're in coronavirus times. People might need a little boost to their well-being. What can we do to help them? What are some, small things that we can say, to do this small challenge, this pleasant activity, or whatever the thing is, to sort of help them feel a little better. And that's very important.
It's very interesting because, as you say, the mental attitude in this sort of time where there is a sense of loss of control and we're being told what to do becomes very important. So how you react to this situation will have a huge impact on your mental and then, the clear links and then your physical health, because the reality cannot be changed. And so I look at this as a great opportunity for behavioral science, because there are often examples, this is classic Rory Sutherland stuff, where he says, sometimes changing reality is really expensive or impossible. But if we can change people's perceptions, we can have the same impact. Absolutely. And I think this is a really interesting example where you go, we're not going to be able to deal until the vaccine comes along. And even then, maybe there'll be COVID-20 or COVID-21 in the next year or so that will mean this becomes a normal piece. So we need to start changing people's perception of what's happening and get them focused. So I think this is really interesting stuff around how behavioral science can help deal with physical as well as mental health issues in terms of getting people to behave in the right way. It's a huge opportunity there, I see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of it comes down to, mindset and how we're thinking about things. And certainly, one thing I was thinking about recently was one sort of framing of where we are and really about the quarantine fresh start. So can we help people think about, use temporal landmarks to sort of categorize time, to say, to distance them, their current and future selves from their previous past selves, and sort of be forgiving of maybe lapses in good behavior that they've had in the past couple of weeks, maybe months. So many people that I've talked to have just completely stopped exercising and worrying about eating healthy. They're doing good for the community by ordering in all the time. Which,
it's a couch potato's dream, right? Because so you're supporting the economy. You're not going out, so you're protecting yourself, you're protecting others, you're setting a really good example. I mean, there's a whole list, and you're educating yourself through Netflix, right? I mean, this is perfection.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very easy thing to rationalize. Like, I am doing good for, I'm helping everyone out. But it's going to have some effects on our waistlines and our health overall. And importantly, especially in coronavirus times, on our immune systems, right? We want to have a really healthy immune system, as, in the case that we do become infected. And so part of having a healthy immune system is doing those things like exercise and eat healthy. And so if we can sort of think of past Aline as, oh, that was the bad quarantine Aline, and like she ate all the Swiss chocolate and was like so lazy, but that was old quarantine Aline, and the new quarantine Aline is not going to be anything like that. That's just one example of how you can sort of use this kind of framing to create these artificial boundaries that actually serve as very powerful motivators to get into that new you and start behaving as you'd like to.
And of course, there's no reason why you can't just switch that on at any time, because we do this with, as you say, with birthdays and with, New Year is a weird thing. It's just a random, it's chosen by someone else. We just kind of go, I will latch onto that and have some resolution around this. But there is no difference between the 31st of December and the 1st of January, particularly in terms of where, the weather doesn't suddenly change. But and I think that's an interesting point, is we just have to discipline ourselves to create those moments and just say to ourselves, right, I am declaring this to be a new start.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of natural landmarks too that we can latch onto. We can say, what's the next holiday? Is Memorial Day coming up, or the first of the week, the first of the month? There are all sorts of natural landmarks that are organically motivating, that we can say, this is going to be the day where my fresh start starts. Right. And it's probably too long to wait for the new year, but that is a
we may still be in this, of course.
I know. That's a terrifying thought.
It's okay. No, I don't mean on the podcast. I meant just in life. Right?
Oh, no. I know what you meant.
That's fascinating. I mean, one of the things I'm really intrigued by, sort of picking up the kind of compliancy end of human risk and looking at it, is we don't like being told what to do. And right now, we are really being told what to do, often conflicting pieces of advice, with different authorities instructing us. But we're under massive orders to do things. And we know that people often won't do the things they're told. So if we look at sort of the way they try and, historically, let's stop people smoking by telling them it's bad for them. And we know that doesn't work. And there's plenty of examples of people that go and have medical checkups and who are told they need to do X, Y, Z, and they just don't do it. And it kills them, right? And literally, we kill ourselves because we want this sense of autonomy. I'm intrigued what you think, how is that dynamic playing out at the moment? Is that different? Is it more intense now, or are we just seeing, is it just manifestations of what we see under quote unquote normal times?
I think this is a really interesting thing to think about. And I think there's two sides of it. One is, telling people what to do is not enough to change their behavior, period, right? Like, we already know that smoking is bad. Right. And, that was never, the difference between someone's decision to smoke or not smoke. So there's the, information doesn't translate into behavior necessarily. And then there's the other side of potential reactance and this idea of authority that you're talking about. And I think this is really complex as well, because some people are so Gavin Fitzsimmons has some research. He's a very big guy in reactance research, and I forget exactly what proportion it is. Maybe it's 20%. I'll have to look this up, but some percentage of people have very strong reaction to being told what to do. It's not everyone. I've found that I'm not one of these people, because I very much appreciate this directive. Everyone, you have to stay home. I felt like when I was choosing to stay home before it was mandatory, I felt like, is this really necessary? I don't have enough signaling coming from the authorities. I want to be told, it's like the hockey players being required to wear helmets. Before that, everyone wanted to wear a helmet, but they didn't want to be the pussy who's wearing a helmet when no one else is. So now that helmets are mandatory, everyone's like, thank God we can wear helmets. Like, that was so terrible when we didn't have to wear helmets. But now we have to, and we all will. And we're not going to bring up the fact that we wanted to. But so that's sort of how I feel about lockdown and these regulations. I'm very grateful for really clear rules everyone, this is what we're going to do. And then we can, start doing our social signaling around that. But you're right. There is a minority of people who are very reactive to this authority. And so one strategy that Gavin has recommended using to as sort of a persuasion strategy is sort of make these people think that it was their idea to do the thing. So you can say, here's a checklist of all the ways that all the things that you can do to help keep others safe during coronavirus times. Do you want to do any of these? And it can be, you're getting onto a plane and the flight attendant gives you this piece of paper and says, okay, like, are there any of these things that you want to do? Wipe down, I don't know. What do you even do on a plane now? I
haven't been on one for so long. I forget. I can't even remember what a plane looks like.
What is that? Yeah. Anyhow, so yeah, of course, like, using a hand sanitizer when you have the opportunity to, wearing a mask and so on. So the people who are reacting against wearing a mask because they're told to wear a mask, if they were given that piece of autonomy to decide, yeah, okay, what am I going to do to protect others? They're likely going to agree that they want to protect others. But if they're the ones who are generating that idea, they're going to be much more compliant.
So this always reminds me of, I always tell a story about, people with kids. If you want to get them to wear a coat, don't tell them to wear a coat, because even if they were intending to wear a coat, it's an instruction from you and they will ignore it. Whereas if you go, you're obviously going to have to wear a coat. So you bank the fact that they need to wear a coat and you go, which of these would you like to wear? And then because they think they're in charge, and it's fascinating. It's a great example as adults. And of course, what's fascinating about that list, you can put some outrageous things on that list, which they would never in a million years ago. They might even go beyond where you would want to instruct them. And because it's on that list of options, there's potential for them to go even further than you would.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's great. And it's interesting to think of your child in the coat example too, in terms of the messenger. So with the parent presenting these options to them, you actually might have a totally different effect if really cool Uncle Ed comes around and is like, hey, like, I'm wearing my coat. Like, let's go outside. Like, they might want to imitate, cool Uncle Ed. So you can think about how that translates as well to coronavirus times, and who's the one who's giving these recommendations. Some people might not have a whole lot of respect for the CDC for whatever reason, but they may have a lot of respect for someone else. So maybe if they're listening to what Donald Trump says and he says, all right, I think it's probably a good idea to wear a mask, I'm going to wear a mask. Then he might need to be a role model and exhibit that behavior for his followers to go along with it and do that as well.
And it's been really interesting to watch the kind of behavioral contagion and sort of cues that people are taking around them, and actions speak louder than words, and inferences. So you can say, you can say one thing, but if you do something else, or you make it clear that you're thinking things, that's the more powerful piece here. And so I'm finding it really interesting to see what we're learning in terms of these kind of communication pieces, because historically we've sort of had individual things. So maybe we have a smoking campaign, or not anti-smoking campaign. Right? Right. I mean, if you go way back when, there would have been smoking campaigns, right? But
I mean, what is advertising if not a smoking campaign?
Right. There's also some Mad Men flashbacks now.
Right.
Perceived wisdom is always we tell people, right? We just go, this is what you must do. And we used logic. Yeah. And then we moved into a world where we kind of went, we recognize that our logic isn't working, so we'll use some of these other kind of clever, slightly more behaviorally infused techniques. And as I look at what we're doing now, I see a variety of those being deployed to greater or lesser effect. And so what I'm kind of intrigued about is are we learning any great lessons here about how to communicate or how not to communicate?
Yes. One thing I'll say is I think I've seen a lot of confirmation bias in myself, where I'm seeking out examples in the media of, here's the New York Times put out this piece where they just showed all of these beautiful photos of completely empty spaces. all over the world. And they were like, here's Times Square. There's no one in it. This is unprecedented. It's amazing. And like all of these different places where they're just completely empty. And so I saw this example. I was like, wow, what a great use of social norm signaling. Thanks, New York Times. You see bad examples too. I know. That's like the super nerdy behavioral scientist to me. But, I was very angry when I saw all the media about, look at all these people hanging out at the beach. Everyone's at the beach right now. And it was like this one beach in Florida that it was definitely, a minority. And there's not, if you look at people's patterns of behavior and the trends over time, people are by and large physical distancing. Like this is pretty much working. There are definitely defectors and there are minorities who are not adhering, but the level of behavior change in terms of actually doing what we're supposed to do has been incredible. And I think we should be like, that behavior should be lauded. I think the more we can focus on the good things and share that norm and not focus on the bad things, or if we're focusing on the bad things, then call out that those are a minority. So if we do this, this sort of shaming, quarantine shaming of people that are breaking quarantine, then say like, everyone else is in quarantine. What are you doing, dummy? Like we have to make it clear like what the social norm is and what it isn't when we're doing that sort of communication.
And it is interesting because as you say, and I agree, I was laughing as you were talking about those empty seats because I know exactly what you're talking about. And I looked at it and went, this is really responsible journalism. They get it. And I think they've just gone, no, this is just nice, right? This is just an unusual photograph that we couldn't normally take that is kind of timely, and we can fill a heck of a lot of space in the paper in a really compelling way.
My gosh.
But I agree. Is you start looking, but there is a point to the analysis that you've been doing there, and that I think we've all been doing, which is looking at and I find myself watching things. And I watch press conferences, right? There's the government propaganda conferences. Now, the US ones are fascinating for one reason. We've got UK ones are sort of slightly different. But I find myself watching those and going, what is going on here psychologically? What tricks are they pulling? And I do the same thing with journalism, where I look at it and go, this article is very smart or very dumb. And of course, they're not thinking in those terms at all. But the reason that you do that analysis is that it has an impact.
Right. Yeah. And it's our job as behavioral scientists to then take whatever is out in the world and then package it in a way that we say, here's what I've identified. Here's how science plays into this thing that's happening, and then ship it out and explain how something is good or how something is bad or how something could have, whatever the effect we think it has on something else, how it relates to behavior. And
I think that, there's potentially sort of, as you were talking there, there's an interesting thing here, which says actually, maybe that is the next phase where we say to ourselves, look, if we're right about the impact these things have, so shots of people on a beach is likely to encourage other people to do the same thing, or at least for people, even if they're not doing it, for them to think, well, they're doing that, so I'll go, me going and doing something that's half as offensive as that is still okay, right? Because I'm not as bad as those people. So there needn't be direct replication of the behavior. It can shift the norm, if you like, into a certain position.
Right.
Maybe that's the next phase of this thing, actually, where we go, okay, the most effective way we can do health type campaigns in the future isn't to waste money on traditional advertising, but we start to think about some of those sort of subtle placements. So you move more into the kind of propaganda techniques, because it seems to me that if we can unlock in this period how some of those things are working, then that might be a really powerful way to start to work, because again, it's subtle and it's not instructive, and it's people will think that they're in control, right? They're just consuming information and then they're making their own mind up.
So I've actually been thinking a lot about this, what is the next phase, right? So we've been in quarantine for a while, and so I work with Dan Ariely, have for a very long time, and much of his literature, his research, less current, but much of his past research focuses on cheating and dishonesty, and when do people sort of start to misbehave, and what are these patterns of misbehavior? And much of what he's found is a slippery slope. And so I'm starting to think about how do we translate what we know about people's switching patterns. So people will, for a very long time, cheat just a little bit, cheat just a little bit, cheat just a little bit. And most cheating that we see, across the landscape is a lot of people cheating just a little bit. And so you could probably see that now already in terms of, okay, I don't need a mask to walk around the block because I'm just walking around the block and I'm probably not going to come within 6 feet of anyone and it's probably fine. So that's just like, okay, I'm just going to be a little bit bad. I'm not going to like go to the grocery store without a mask.
Because that would be irresponsible.
Crazy.
Right.
Yeah, that would be irresponsible. But, when I walk around the neighborhood, it's fine. Or, like a friend comes over and as long as we're apart for the whole time, at least 6 feet, we don't really need to. So these are like the little cheating.
Create what I call creative compliance, right? So you sort of, It's not compliant, but you kind of, you've convinced yourself it's a spirit of the law, right? That's what they meant,
It
right?
feels small. Yeah. Of course, the virus doesn't really differentiate between like how small.
Yeah, I would have got you if you were in the store, but I'm not going to touch you because you're right.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Right. It reminds me of, there was this amazing photograph of so a lot of stores have been placing these markers to show what 6 feet is, and so there was this series of I think it was 3 ATM machines or some sort of ticketing booth, and they had markers 6 feet behind the machine. Of course, the machines were less than 6 feet away from each other. And so the lines are, maybe like 1 foot away from each other.
So it's one-dimensional compliance.
In the other direction. Yeah. So like the virus only hops one direction is like what this is signaling. It's just like, wait a minute. We haven't really thought this through. Yeah. And so I'm thinking about, in general, just how, so I'll go back to the research. So Dan finds that when people are doing a lot of this little bit of cheating, but then at some point, there's this sort of breaking point where they say, I've already done some cheating. I'm just going to go all the way. Like I've seen that this isn't, there aren't any negative
nothing happens,
so
right.
Nothing's happened. So they have this switching point where they go all the way and they cheat all out. And so what I'm curious to see is that something that could happen in real life now where people are like, oh, I tried the quarantine thing. I was so mostly good for a long time. And this, they sort of fall down this slippery slope of, having more and more people over. And, there's, say you have, larger gatherings, more frequent gatherings to suddenly like, this doesn't seem to be affecting us because most people are not, the majority of people don't have coronavirus. So what they're seeing is, what's on the news, but if they're, until they are infected, it's not going to feel up close and personal enough to really be that real. And so the more examples they have of being in contact with people and not being infected, the more that will strengthen their belief that what they're doing is okay, even when it's not.
Right. And it's fascinating in a way that, I do a lot of thinking around rules and this question of principles versus rules and codification versus sort of non-codification. And of course, the benefits of codification is it's very clear. And you can turn something that is sort of nuanced into something that's binary. So speed limits would be a good example. There is, providing you've got an accurate measurement, there's no question as to whether you are compliant or non-compliant. But of course, the speed limit is an approximation of sort of, what's appropriate for the average driver in average conditions on this particular stretch of road in an average vehicle, and you can add all those dynamics. And so for some people it'll be stupidly low. For other people, it's probably too high. And so it's approximate, but it's an attempt to kind of give people certainty around compliance. And what I think is interesting here is that we've got a balance of, there are some very strict rules where there's a sort of, the distance that you need to be apart from people. And that's sort of measurable, tangible, binary. But of course, that's just guesswork, right? It's not like it's sort of, if you're just above the thing, you're safe, you're 100% safe. And then it's really dangerous, lethal just the other side of the line, because the virus will just stop itself. I cannot cross that line, right? So
everything drops
Yeah,
off,
exactly.
right?
It just literally falls out the sky. Gravity kicks in and it drops down and you're okay. And so I think it's interesting when we look at the balance of specificity and generality. And in the UK, they've done a brilliant thing where we've been told, on the one hand, we've sort of got some very specific things we should do. So where they can put numbers on it, they put numbers on it, distances, for example, and how many minutes you're allowed outside the house and specific destinations.
Oh, really?
And, so there was
how many minutes are you allowed outside of the
60
house?
minutes of exercise. And then they shifted away. So that was the start point. And then they shifted away from that and sort of went, well, you use your common sense. And of course, one of the things about common sense is that it's not that common, right? And of course, it's massively open to interpretation because it's driven by your perception of your own behavior. And then we get into kind of fundamental attribution error and your presumptions about, why you do things and why other people do and all of this. But I'm fascinated by this piece because when you talk about Dan's research and pieces, that clearly one of the ways that you sort of know there are no consequences is you've crossed the line. And so I'm intrigued as to whether you've got any thoughts around, is it helpful to be specific so that people kind of have no excuse, or is that unhelpful because you are codifying things where actually the codification is nonsense, as you've highlighted with the disease, the virus just drops out of the sky?
Yeah, no, I think it's very helpful to have very simple heuristics that people can latch onto over nothing. I mean, I don't think people have any idea without any guidance. I wouldn't have thought even 6 feet was necessary before all of this. And I think that there are ways that you can implement those 6 feet that are more creative than others, because even if we know 6 feet, we don't necessarily really understand what that is. I've seen some funny lots of things on the internet nowadays. There's one restaurant that has these pool noodle hats. Pool noodles are about 6 feet long, so they give people, the people who are coming to the restaurant pool noodle hats so that they can't, if they'll hit someone if they turn around and are closer than 6 feet. I think that it is very helpful to give people guidelines, and I don't think that these guidelines should be. I don't think they should be overly specific. I don't think we need to give people the error bars, right? 6 feet plus or minus 3. I don't think that's helpful. I think we need to keep it as simple as possible, give people a rule of thumb, and then work on how do we motivate people to do those things. I think that's going to be the next thing to drop is motivation. So I think people are less concerned about, am I doing exactly the right thing, and starting to get tired of doing anything, any version of that thing. And so the sort of next space to focus our energy is towards how do we keep up the momentum and keep people motivated to not do that switch into all out non-adherence, non-compliance. How do we keep them in that, even if we have to accept that they're going to be cheating just a little bit, that's way better than the switch to all out cheating, right? Yeah.
So a little bit. So you're a little bit of tolerance around that, because I was thinking about, dieting as an example, where you get people who go on those massive blowouts, which sort of, because, it's kind of like, well, I've crossed the line. What the hell? Right. I'm going to have that, I've started to eat cake. I'm going to have the whole damn thing. Right? And I just push it because I'm in the kind of naughty zone. So I might as well stick in that and go for it, enjoy it. And of course, if we could make it less criminal to break the rules, or perhaps if the diet had been designed in a way that reflected the fact that every so often you do need to be allowed to do that.
Yeah. Or we have easy ways of breaking the rules, ways of breaking the rules that are actually not that unhealthy, right? So I can overeat on celery. I can have as much celery as I want.
How much? That's because celery is just water, right? So how
you
much?
You can eat so much celery.
That's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's back to a sort of perceptions of stuff. So if I think about alcohol limits, for example, where they create this sort of sense of units or whatever measurement you want, which is not, again, it's calibrated to the average. And they kind of know that people are going to break those rules, so they set them deliberately a little bit too tight. At least this is my presumption. And
I don't know about these alcohol rules. Maybe.
Right. I know this may just be dealing with the UK's drink culture, but we don't have rules. We have these things called units, right? And there's a recommended number of units per week. Recommended equals maximum, not minimum. Right. And there's quite a lot of threatening language around that. But I think they kind of know that if it's sort of, if you go crazy and drink 3 times the limit on a regular basis, that's trouble. But if you're just kind of bouncing around, and I like this idea of sort of making it easy to break the rules occasionally, because we all need that sense of breaking out. And I think what's interesting here is, as you say, there are times when breaking the rules is a really bad call. Like in a confined space, spluttering over everybody would not be a good thing under any circumstances.
Yeah. Spitting in someone's face.
Right.
Don't do that. Definitely off limits.
This is helpful health advice for the listeners. I'm appreciating this.
Yeah, just in general. In coronavirus times.
Right, yeah, exactly. But that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because there are certain behaviors that feel odd. So the wearing of masks for people in Western countries feels like a weird imposition. But you go to Japan and it's been perfectly normal. And it's been perfectly normal for pro-social reasons. And I think that was the other interesting discovery. Everybody went, I am not wearing a mask, because on the presumption that the mask was there to protect you. And of course it's not. It's a very pro-social thing to protect other people. And so if I look at something like that, as you say, that would have been a real challenge to, if you'd said to people, you will all wear masks, that would have been, but it's kind of come in through the back door a little bit, and we've stealthed in as a behavior. And I think it's interesting to watch these sort of shifts.
And you saw a lot of people making masks and getting really creative with masks, with cloth masks, not with the N95, but can't quite do that. But I think that sort of helped with the social approval as well, and the spreading, and the people offering like, hey, I'm making masks. Does anyone want one? I know a lot of people who are doing that. If you can sew, like, this is your time to shine.
Right, sewing and cooking. It's those homemaker skills.
And garden. Don't forget gardening.
But that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's another example of the coat piece, where you're giving people a sense of peace, and it's an opportunity to demonstrate some personality. So you can personalize it, and you're not having it doesn't, because the risk of masks is it removes our personalities, right? And you can't see the full face, and so it's dehumanizing in some respects, because we can't get that feedback from the mouth that we would normally get. So that's an interesting example of.
You have to really smile with your eyes.
Right? Have you tried that? Because I read Tyra Banks had something that she pushed on America's Next Top Model, where she was talking about, I think it's called smiking or something, which is smiling with your eyes, that she apparently has perfected, that we all need to work on. I haven't.
Wow. I mean, it's the Duchenne smile, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting example of sort of allowing customizable compliance. That sort of says, how do you make this? Right. And I guess the same that takes off the same logic that sort of says, dieting, those strict diets that tell you precisely what you have to eat get a bit dull if they are, you could have this, or you could have this, or you could have this, and you give it to people in a way that gives them, have what you feel like within certain constraints. That's much more powerful, because it's that sense of agency. Yeah,
and I won't go too far into dieting, but I think that one thing about, for example, the low carb diet is that that makes it very successful outside of research and physiological sort of elements of it, is that it's so easy to comply with. It's like, well, all of these starches and things that pasta's out, just can't have any of it. There's no potatoes. It makes things, whole categories are off limits in a way that once you kind of start and you get used to the things that you can tell I'm speaking from experience here, but it's very easy to follow. I found the same thing with vegetarianism. I've been a vegetarian in the past, and it's so easy to order from a restaurant because there are 2 things on the menu that you can have, and you don't mind. You're a vegetarian by choice, so you want those things anyway. It just makes everything simpler to have these simple rules. And I think that there's a delicate balance, right? To our point before, you don't want to be overly constricting. You don't want to sort of take away people's autonomy and ability to make mistakes and start over. You want to make sure that they have that sort of emergency reserve, right? Where they can say, I'm going to use my carb of the week allotment, and I'm allowed to do that because I've decided in advance that I'm low carb for 6 days a week, and then 1 day a week I have my forgiveness day. And, that's fine. That's a lot motivating than saying 100% of the time you have to be perfect. If you can allow for that forgiveness and for that ability to start over, you won't have as many sort of disastrous consequences from short-term lapses. Those short-term lapses don't turn into long-term lapses because you're able to recover from
right.
them.
And this is really interesting, actually, because I was sort of reflecting on the thing and says, actually, maybe the way you structure Corona rules is around saying, let's have a few rules that we know people are going to break from time to time that don't really that sound significant but don't really matter. And because if you're required to be on best behavior all of the time, you are going to screw up. So we've seen this, people screw up from time to time. So you need that little outlet and a sense of, I'm not going to get in massive. I feel a little, I'm allowed to have a lapse and there's redemption for me and I haven't crossed the overall line. And I think that's quite interesting when one structures these things, is to think a little bit around that, not on the presumption that we're looking for 100% compliance all the time, but we're looking for those things that we absolutely, the coughing and spitting on people type situation that we really don't want. Right. And then we have some other things where we, right. Yeah. I mean, that's, as you say, that's just normal. Right? It's not even, and then maybe we flex some of that. That's some kind of interesting food for thought there. Look, before I let you go, and this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, so thank you. I want to pick up, because you write some great articles and you do some stuff for Forbes. And I just wanted to spend a split second just picking up some of the things that you write about, because I'll put some links to this in the show notes, but I'm intrigued as to sort of what your mandate is there and how you sort of think about that.
Sure. So one thing that is very important to me is disseminating the findings of behavioral science, both in terms of, here are some experiments that were run in the lab and in the field and so on, and here's how they can translate to what we're experiencing in the real world. And so I think this application of behavioral science is, very timely right now, but also just in the past 10 years or so, and thinking about how the field has changed. It's a huge priority of mine, as well as, I work with the Center for Advanced Hindsight and Pattern Health, and their missions are aligned in the sense that we want to be really forthcoming about talking about our research and sharing the findings and the methods of behavioral science. And so I've been on a long journey towards becoming a Forbes contributor, and now I've been able to start pushing that out. I don't only publish on Forbes, but that's sort of become my regular column in the.
But I just loved it, because it was sort of I expect to see you writing in behavioral science type publication, and to suddenly see this thing appearing there, I thought wasn't that it didn't belong, but it was just lovely, because I was like, wow, this is like the mainstream, and it's giving it a kind of platform and an audience that might not naturally tend towards some of the geekier things that you and I were interested in. So I just thought it was a really, really nice piece. And because you are, by dint of that publication, you've got to write it in a certain way, because they're not going to publish something that's overly technical, that doesn't resonate with their readership.
Yeah, but I think that even in behavioral science outlets, we should be communicating clearly, more clearly than many behavioral scientists are communicating right now.
I love that you said that, because I agree fundamentally, because I kind of go, if this science is about understanding human beings, right, it is the one science that has zero excuse for not making things easily understood, because we know how people process things. If we do.
We have to practice what we preach.
So I agree with that wholeheartedly. But no, look, I've loved reading them, and as I'll put a link to a few, but it's definitely worth for listeners, particularly those that aren't so well versed in behavioral science. It's worth diving into, because it'll take you to some interesting places. And I wanted to say, one, thank you for getting it into the mainstream, because I think that's really powerful. But secondly, well done, because I imagine it's not the easiest thing in the world to get on that roster.
It's been a long journey, but I think well worth it. I think like sharing these things with the masses is, it's been developing over time and becoming more and more common, and it's the way we have to go. We can't just talk to ourselves.
Well, we can, but it's a bit tragic.
I mean,
right?
we shouldn't.
There's a point where we start to get very unimpressed by ourselves if we do that. But on that note, thank you so much for all the stuff that you've done, because it's fascinating, and as I'll put links in the show notes to that. But secondly, for coming on the podcast and providing some real thought-provoking insights around the current situation. It's been incredibly interesting, and I think for listeners, particularly those working in compliance and risk, a whole load of things that I think are just transferable regardless of what behaviors it is and what the rationale for those behaviors is that you're trying to get people to do. I think there's a lot we can learn from that. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
So that's it for another episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Aline for coming on and being such a fun guest, and of course to you for listening. If you're interested in finding out more about Aline's work, then there are links to that and her Forbes articles in the show notes. If you're not already a subscriber to the Human Risk Podcast, I'd love to have you on board. You'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. It's on all the podcasting platforms. If you haven't yet left a review for the show, then it would also hugely help me if you could do that. That raises the profile, allows other people to find it, and means I can continue to attract the kind of high quality guests I've managed thus far. I'll be back very soon with another episode of this show. But in the meantime, please stay safe, and I'll see you very soon again on the Human Risk Podcast.